Take two. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the October 10th meeting of the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. Thanks all for being here. Just for the subcommittee, Rich Cowart, our co-chair, is not able to make it today. He's on some work travel. I'll be facilitating the meeting, and we're going to start off with our logistics. I'm wondering if I can get a volunteer to take notes for this meeting. Preferably someone who hasn't filled that role in the past. Any takers for note taking? I see Christine's hand. I think you've done it for us before, but okay, appreciate that, Christine. Oh, you're muted though. If you're saying, no, I didn't actually mean to take notes, I can't hear you.
No, I'll do it.
Thank you so much.
Christine, how many times have you done it?
Oh, who's counting, right?
Well, I know I've done it exactly once. So if you've done it more than once, then I will do it.
Okay, you go for it then.
All right.
Thank you, Bram. Perfect. Okay, our first order of business is to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was September 12th. Those were embedded in the agenda. Hopefully folks had a chance to take a quick look at those notes. I'll give you just a quick minute now and then ask if there are any edits or objections to approving the minutes from our last meeting. Any concerns with the minutes as they were circulated? Seeing no concerns, we will deem those approved. And I'm going to quickly go over the agenda. We do have a lot to cover here today. So I'm going to give a quick agenda review and then we're going to dive right into our business for the day. We're going to start off with our task group updates following the sequence of we've heard from our transportation task group and our buildings and thermal task group. So the spotlight today will be on the electric sector task group and the potential recommendations that they've been developing. We'll have some subcommittee discussion on those recommendations, hear any public comment related to that discussion, and then we'll shift gears and hear from our Just Transitions liaisons about incorporating the guiding principles kind of throughout the work that we are doing this fall. And then we're going to shift gears once again, move to stakeholder meeting planning. We have two upcoming stakeholder input sessions in October and November. We're going to spend some time fleshing out the structure of those meetings. Again, pause for public comment, and I do want to spend about 15 minutes at the end. We've been shortchanging our committee business session, but we do need to talk about subcommittee next steps, and I'll just give a teaser that schedule and frequency of meetings is a topic that we're going to need to discuss, whether we're going to need to move faster to more frequent meetings than monthly meetings. So hi, David, welcome. Do you have a quick comment?
Hey everybody. It's good to see folks. Just a quick request, and if you can't do it, that's okay. If there's any chance of doing a little switch on the Just Transition visual in the stakeholder meeting, it could be very helpful for me because I have a conflict at 1. If it's not possible, Sophie's here and Sophie will be great. And so, but if that doesn't mess things up, it would be a big help for me.
Yeah, so Callie's here. Did we lose Sam? Just Transitions folks, are you able to accommodate that switcheroo?
Yeah, that's fine. So you're saying that the Just Transitions visual discussion would go after the stakeholder meeting discussion?
Yeah,
that's fine with me. And yeah, I assume Sam maybe had some technical issues or something, and but that's at least fine with me.
Sounds good. Okay, Scott, hi. Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Scott McCormick. I'm from the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. Andrea Wright and David Farnsworth, and I've been talking about liaising between the two subcommittees on issues relevant to mostly thermal, but somewhat related to electrification. So I'm going to be sitting in and taking notes and listening to what you guys are talking about and trying to make sure that we're coordinating with you as we move forward. I'm also the lead of our community capacity and planning task group, sorry. And we'll be also looking at it from an institutional framework. So happy to join you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for being here and for that continued coordination work with rural resilience. Okay, so I think we're going to switch into our update from the electricity task group. And I know Liz and company pulled together some slides for us. Brian's going to bring those up. We'll
Great.
dive right in.
Can definitely say you will have seen prettier slides in your life. So apologies for that, but the content I think is there. Also, you all should know that while today is the day for the spotlight, as it were, I think, as you said, Melissa, to be on this task group's work so far, it's unfortunately a bit of a calendar conflict. Obviously, Rich isn't here. There's also an Act 179 task group meeting kind of, related tangentially to what we're talking about actually today, that some of our members will be attending, including, I think, TJ probably, who's on now, but dropping off. Is that right, TJ? If you're there, you don't have to confirm.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. So I might suggest that rather than drone through all 6 slides or whatever it is, maybe we pause as I do the slides in case there are questions or reactions while we still do have TJ, because I think once he drops off, if I'm looking correctly, Sam wasn't able to join or dropped off. I saw her earlier. So it might just be me, which isn't which isn't great for kind of the substantive discussion. So anyway, with that introduction, I'm happy to start, and maybe if it's okay with you, we'll just go a slide at a time to see if there are questions for TJ in the 30 minutes that he's with us. Great, so we can advance the slide. I don't have control. Brian has control, right?
Brian's trying to have control here.
Okay. I'd be happy to switch and share if you want me to, but if it's working, then let's do this.
Yeah, there we
Great.
go.
We can slip right past that. Well, I'll just say it quickly. Rich has joined us, TJ, of course,
Okay.
Peter Sterling from REB, and Sam Lash on the Just Transitions Committee, obviously, who was here earlier. So that's been our group thus far. And we need lots of other input from all of you. Okay, keep going. Okay, so the way we've structured this slide deck is to remind all of us of the pathways that applied to the electricity sector in the Climate Action Plan. Mention briefly the strategies under each pathway, the status of those, and then most importantly, the last part of each slide, which is the potentially complementary actions. We also at the end briefly highlight, although bluntly I will just put my personal opinion out there, the most important part of this, some of the cross-cutting issues that really need to be hit. And I appreciate Scott joining us for that reason in particular when we get there. Okay, so pathway number 1 in the Climate Action Plan was the need to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the electric sector. You will recall the progress that had been made already in that sector based upon state policies and utility actions. And it was identified that 100% carbon-free or renewable electricity portfolio would go even further toward supporting the other sectors, particularly building and thermal and transportation, building thermal and transportation rather, as we electrify. And so that recommendation was in the CAP. The status as described by the task group, obviously this can get written up in whatever way we decide in the updated plan, is that recommendation really has been implemented through Act 179, which was passed this past session, and establishes a 100% tiered renewable energy goal. There are lots, as usual, with a renewable portfolio standard, lots of details behind that and how it works, both as to particular utilities as well as by tier in terms of overall regional renewables, new regional renewables and locally cited renewables, and the timeline for each of those and their path. But overall, Act 179 did implement based upon that recommendation we had made, and there is a timeline for that implementation along with check-in reports and studies along the way. For potentially complementary actions, even though should Act 179 be implemented as intended, it will further drive out carbon from our portfolio through its requirement to have 100% renewable on the time period set forth. There are some complementary actions to consider in the update, and those are listed here as we've developed them so far, even though the action will probably be elsewhere given the progress that we've had on this issue. For example, there is a study that's ongoing right now and is subject to that meeting TJ's about to go to regarding potential replacement of group net metering with regard, community access to solar, particularly on the affordable housing side, and just this need to follow through as reflected in the next bullet with how some of the programs for community renewables, particularly solar in Vermont, are being rolled out. The state received a very substantial and meaningful Solar for All grant from the federal government that will be implemented to help support community solar, as well as solar for residential customers and other contexts. And utilities are also rolling out or already have community solar programs. So all of that deserves both mention and update, as well as noting of how it fits in with the revised renewable portfolio standard known here as the RES. We also noted that a topic of conversation in our last plan and during the renewable portfolio standard discussion for Act 179 last session was the time scale upon which the matching needs to take place. It's annually right now in Vermont, and that's consistent with other states in the region. ISO New England is looking at implementing what are known, I'm just going to call them colloquially, hourly RECs. In other words, renewable energy certificates that can get matched not just to the I think it's monthly schedule, if I remember correctly now, but down to the hourly level. And as that is implemented, there's a possibility that doing a more granular match through state requirements would also be appropriate. But there's a lot of things that would have to be discussed and determined there. So it's something that we plan to take a look at for the next update. I can pause there because the last bullet is other, and really just as a group, we identified that we had the biomass task group, which obviously included electric generation issues, but also discussed whether to include thermal. We haven't landed on what, if anything, should be done there, but did have this other bullet both to capture that idea as well as any other thoughts this group has. So I will stop on that pathway in case there are any questions that immediately come to mind on that one. I can't see hands, or at least I can't see all the hands because I'm seeing screen.
Trying to check. Thanks, Liz. Any questions? Speak up. Any questions for the electric task group on pathway 1?
Does anyone know the timeline for the study of potential replacements for group net metering?
Yeah, I can answer that, Bram. So we are due to have a report in January, a final report. We're expecting to have a draft report out in sometime in early November. We've had a few stakeholder meetings with statutorily designated stakeholders, plus other invited entities who we thought could help with the conversation. And today's our third stakeholder meeting. We'll put out that public draft in early November.
Great, thank you.
Christine.
I just want to pause and reflect on the fact that the success that we've had in the electric sector is a very good on the ground, real world example, in my opinion, of the positive effect of strong, thoughtful, deliberative policy and regulatory success. And I personally don't believe that the market would have delivered close to 100% carbon-free renewable electricity in Vermont, absent strong policy and regulatory guidance in Vermont. And I hope by now, and I hope that we keep that in mind as we continue our climate action planning in the other sectors.
Thanks, Christine. Right. Seeing one of the climate action plan key recommendations being put into place. Highlighting.
Great. Should we move to the next slide? It gets
Oh,
a little,
that's-
it gets a little meatier, so.
Let's forge ahead.
I'm working on it here.
I can tell. I see the green arrow.
Yeah, sometimes Zoom disables other things. Come on,
Okay.
there we go, sorry.
Wow. I hope everyone has their glasses on. And again, I apologize. This obviously will get posted. Okay, trying to do this quickly so we can get to questions. The second pathway was enabling Vermonters to choose electrification, to help with decarbonization. And the strategy was providing financial and technical assistance for Vermonters to upgrade electrical service and install equipment. The status, as many of you know from the programs that you work on, outside of this council, there is work underway, including, and this is just a list of some of the work underway, utilities supporting distribution transformer upgrades where it's cost effective to do so. There's a report that is due this coming January by the PUC on such service upgrades for purposes of electric vehicle infrastructure, for example. So that will be something we'll have by the time of the CAP update to take into account. There's also federal funding being deployed now, for some of these programs, such as for electrical panel upgrades through the Home Electrical System Upgrades Grant that's being administered by EVT, but implemented by some of the utilities. So at any rate, there's good progress, but like many things in life, more to do, right? And so the complementary actions to consider for the 2025 updates are listed below. Apologies again for the size of the font, but there's a lot of words there. In general, they include how to continue to address barriers to electrification in a manner that supports a just transition, thinking about funding for specific income levels, for example, or particular communities, making sure programs are just easy for all customers, right? I mean, that's a goal we all have. For customers generally, and in particular for those who have been more impacted over time and more, have suffered more energy burden, as we've talked about in other meetings. So anyway, easy sign up and participation, providing technical assistance, that sort of thing is something that we should continue to highlight as a need. Relatedly, looking at whether there are improvements that can be made generally to outreach, education, contractor availability, and participation. This starts to get into the cross-cutting issues of workforce development, for example, in order to drive further expansion and uptake of electrification programs and service upgrades. There's various strategies that could be used. Rich Cowart mentioned, I think it was Rich, mentioning on-bill financing, just one example of something already underway that has had limited uptake, but there are probably others. So that's the second potential. Third, and these are all obviously interrelated, ways that the electric grid itself can support customer electrification necessary to meet our climate goals. Such as, when service drops are done, when transformers are changed out, when lines are touched, what upgrades should be done, and how should those be paid for in general when there's line extensions. This is a very general statement. The customer who's seeking the line extension, of course, pays for that. And there's, just some need to take a look at as we touch the system, what are the standards that should be used now and who should be paying for them, keeping in mind the equity issues of making sure bills remain affordable for Vermonters as a whole. Okay, then, oh yes, then noting something that I think might have been underpinning what Christine said a moment ago. I'm just guessing there, Christine, but in the event a clean heat standard or alternative were not to move forward either at all or as quickly as presently contemplated, is there any further role for the electric sector? We already have in our renewable energy standard a tier 3 requirement and program that has been, I think, largely viewed as successful and positive. So flagging that as just something to mention, knowing that clean heat will still be very much a primary solution. Whether to support the next one. Oh yeah, the next one is, I think, probably reflected already, Christine, in your group's work. But this idea of whether it would be cost effective and appropriate for building and electric codes for new construction to reflect systems and upgrade, systems and requirements for systems that are consistent with our climate goals. And then finally, an offshoot of that is whether there are other technologies that could be better supported through other paths and presently available, like whether there's a role for regulated utilities on network geotherm systems, as has come up sometimes. So anyway, this is a little bit more of a laundry list because it's a little bit more of a, hey, everybody throw their ideas out there. But I'll pause there in case either TJ has comments or you have questions that are appropriate for either of us, knowing he has to leave in a few minutes.
Any questions from the group? Trying to monitor hands, but feel free to shout out. I guess just a quick one, Liz, not hearing from any other subcommittee members, specifically on, you mentioned the enabling upgrades like panel upgrades to ensure that people can proceed with electrification and the federal money is being deployed. Of course, our concerns are there's a clock on that money associated with those funds because they were ARPA funds and of course it's a limited bucket of money. Has the group kind of gotten into or do you expect to get into recommendations around funding sources? Especially for things like panel upgrades that don't actually bring the savings. They're right at facilitating technology.
Yeah, we haven't yet gotten into that topic. We haven't yet discussed that. Yeah. Other questions on that one? Otherwise, we could move to pathway 3. TJ, did you want to say anything before you had to leave? I saw you come off mute, I think.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of put all of these pathways under the context of one, the electric sector, as we know, is already really clean, a couple % of our emissions here. And that as we look to electrify, one of the things we will talk about as a task group is the balance of putting costs on the electric sector that actually disincentivize people to switch to electricity. And so there's always that balance. It's really easy. One of the reasons that the electric sector has had the success is as Christine mentioned, is not only public policy efforts, but also because it's easy to hide a tax in electric rates, to be blunt, and it's politically more palatable to do so. So we need to, recognize what we're doing if we are putting costs on a particular sector, whether it's electric sector or thermal sector or transportation. Who's bearing those costs? How those revenues are collected, and then who's benefiting from it. And so I just don't. We only mention equity a couple times in these slides, so I just want to make sure that folks know that that is really at the forefront of the discussions that we'll be having, at least in my mind.
Thanks, TJ. Christine, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with everything that TJ just said and everything that Liz has shared. I do want to call the elephant in the room question, which is clearly, as a society and as an economy, we're enduring new costs for things we haven't planned for. So the cost is going to have to fall somewhere, right? The cleanup from flooding and hurricanes, et cetera, and the protection of human life. With that as a broader concept, I guess I would like to ask the question that we've started to ponder at a very, very 101 level in the thermal sector meetings, which is, what if we provided a new, different approach and mechanism for incentivizing and rewarding electric and gas utilities, since they're regulated and there's a regulatory framework in place, for reducing greenhouse gas emissions through a wide variety of activities that currently are beyond their reach and their jurisdiction and their regulatory role. And I'm just curious, I hadn't thought about this ahead of time, but I'm just curious what's top of mind for those really close to the electric sector when folks like me and others on the thermal sector task force are thinking in a thermal mindset, but are sort of overlapping into the electric sector. What should we be stopping ourselves thinking about, or encouraging ourselves to think more about, when we pop out broad, not thought through ideas like, well, let's just incentivize utilities to reduce more greenhouse gases beyond what tier 3 has already enabled to happen?
Yeah, you can probably see a little bit more caution, I guess, in the way that our slide deck is written up compared to yours, right? Behind that, yeah. I can give a brief response unless TJ, you got to go and you want to say something beforehand.
You can go first. I
Okay.
have a little time left.
Okay, top of mind from the utility point of view, Christine, I feel like I can represent pretty well here, is that so many of those recovery costs you mentioned right up front are actually flowed right through electric bills. Even when for municipalities FEMA can respond, there are gaps. And in general, for utility response, it goes right to the customers. And it is so important that we do everything we can to harden infrastructure and prevent that damage from continuing to occur. And, you know, the next time, build it better, and all of those things that go to resilience, back to, you know, the cross-cutting issues, are so important. And it's critically important that we all recognize those are costs customers also will be bearing. And so I do think that if you had a group of folks, not just me, speaking on that topic you just asked, they would say, please remember what our not only core competency, but core service obligation is now. And remember that we need to do what we do now incredibly well, even better in the future for customers, and as cost effectively as we possibly can, because we're all facing those costs. And so to consider expanding, if you want to call it that, you know, whatever term you had used earlier, going into other areas, on top of that, presents not only potential really significant cost challenges on the electric bill, which, you know, some could say, well, it's replacing other costs, so why isn't that okay? But it's a compounding issue when you consider the infrastructure needs that we have to protect customers in the face of you know, increasingly fierce storms and other threats, and the need to really make electricity not only reliable and safe and affordable, but like in the future, as folks electrify, the thing they can rely on to make sure their quality of life is as they deserve it to be, right? Because it's work, you know, work from home, telemedicine, education, all of those things. So I think that's the hesitancy that you would hear. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. I'll also comment from kind of a regulatory perspective. And what I'm about to say is just kind of things that we consider without trying not to put any position on them. But really, all of those costs that you're talking about, whether they're adaptation or recovery costs or program costs, which I think that's how I heard the question. Oh, could we just have more programs from the utilities? Those are all, as Liz said, costs that go and are paid for by electric ratepayers, which kind of hamper the economic proposition for Vermonters to switch to electricity, right? The higher the rates, the harder it is to make a heat pump pencil out. And so I think that's number one. Number two, those rates are collected in a manner that's regressive. And so we think about the equity issue, in terms of, additional electric rates collected on a per kilowatt hour basis. Those who have less, well, I don't need to explain it, just the regressive compared to the progressive tax structure, that more progressive tax structure. And then third, from a regulatory perspective, utilities were given franchises to do a job to electrify and maintain service. And as in exchange for that, they get a regulated, secure rate of return on that. And as we shift other programs, other asks to utilities, we're shifting risk onto kind of the ratepayer base, as opposed to it being another base that, whether it's private markets that we're trying to encourage to make investments, or other entities, we're kind of putting that risk on ratepayer investment to solve the problem. Now, none of those things, you may be able to solve for all three of those things. So I just wanted to raise kind of some of the things that we think about when we're talking about additional programs to the electric sector.
Do you have any follow-up, or thank you, PJ and Liz.
I guess this is the luxury of being in this phase of life, that I can just speak what I believe to be the truth. And I agree with everything that's been said. And we're not going to solve for this probably in the second cap, but clearly the system that we have at the local, state, regional, and federal level is broken in the climate action and clean energy space. When you think about what lies ahead over the next 10, 20, 30 years, it's not broken for what we've had for the last 10, 20, or 30 years. We've done amazing innovation in Vermont. And I just can't help but say at this moment in time that we've got the best and the brightest involved with the Climate Council and the various subcommittees. And I do truly believe it falls upon us to make sure that the next round of best and brightest solve for the next generation of questions, which we're already experiencing the problems from. And what we do now is not sufficient. And we have to, at some point, acknowledge that. And today's not the day, but it's coming. And I've said my piece, and I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
No need to be quiet. Thanks for raising. I mean, I think what Christina's raising is a really critical issue around the complex role the electric sector is going to play, that we all expect it will play in decarbonizing transportation and thermal, and hearing kind of the tension there inherent and the pros and cons of potentially embedding costs to do the work that we all know we need to do in the electric sector, right? There are pros and cons, and we all want to be thoughtful about this approach and avoid unintended consequences, such as those increasing electric rates that TJ flagged. So important conversation. And just a note, we're going to get into talking about the public input sessions, but certainly hearing from the regulated utilities will be a key part in our stakeholder input sessions, and making sure those voices are at the table as well. So Sam, good. I'm glad that you are back. Did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted two things. One, I'm hearing a ton of echo. Sorry, Melissa, when you're speaking. So I don't know. It's just making it a little hard for me to understand. And I don't know if there's anything to be done with that about that, but just a FYI. And then the other thing was just, I'm sure most people in the room have heard me say this before, is just the consciousness also of the equity issue in terms of differences across our distribution of utilities, and how that also plays into this, right? So their ability to react, and then also the fact that some areas in Vermont and some people in Vermont are disproportionately affected by the impacts of increasing environmental disasters that, you know, as a result, direct result of climate change, and just to be aware of that. And so we might also need to consider how those costs are passed on. Not, you know, yeah, I guess maybe, I don't know. I don't want to step in too much hot water here, but just thinking about how that will affect folks living in different places without a choice differently. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Sam, for the comments. And is my audio any better? I'm hearing from a few people that my audio is
Oh,
bad.
way better. Way better. Thank you. Sorry. I know it's always awkward to point that out, but I think it's for the best.
No, I'm getting lots of messages. Thank you. And no, thanks, Sam, for the comments. And yeah, I really do hope that the subcommittee and our guests feel like we can have a really frank and robust conversation. These are difficult issues that we're grappling with, the equity concerns, the cost concerns, they're all real. And I just want to make sure we're fostering really open and fair dialogue here. So Liz, was this your last slide for us?
It's not the last, but I would propose that, given that we're a little bit beyond the public comment time, this particular slide, which again will be posted publicly, just reiterates things that were listed in the last climate plan as needing to continue. It actually gets to the point I made with Christine about the work the utilities are doing now in their space of kind of core service, which is a lot and a lot more needs to happen and is happening. So anyway, that's what this one concerns, and it may be best just to skip past it in favor of people being able to look at it because it's not new content fundamentally. And we could go on to the next one, which I hopefully could summarize. I'd like to be able to end this relatively quickly, just showing the last cross-cutting, because then we can go to public comment perhaps. Our group recognized, as I think our entire subcommittee has recognized, that there are these very critical cross-cutting issues that in some ways are the big issues, even though they don't reside neatly or squarely within a single subcommittee. And therefore there's a risk that they will not be as, we need to really make sure they get elevated at the right place and level in the climate action plan, despite the way that our kind of subcommittees are structured. The two that so far have most occurred to us and are intertwined are land use and resilience of infrastructure. And so just noting with the exclamation points how important these are. Sam, I think, who's on obviously and just spoke, had really raised the importance of thinking through some of the land use issues related to electric generation and siting, but not just that, related to all things development. The last plan had talked about compact development and smart growth. Consider whether that's still the way that we as a council would want to support the policy. Understanding the benefits it can bring on the emissions reduction side for transportation in particular, but on the other hand, recognizing the adaptation issues that exist and the flooding and damage that we have seen. So I think our group recognized just how important that was, and that it is obviously not just an electric sector issue. Related to that, there is the resilience of infrastructure piece. There's quite a bit of work happening on the electric side, certainly in Vermont and nationally, making sure the grid becomes even more robust in the face of these terrible storms. That needs to continue to happen. And how can it best be coordinated in a way across sectors when, for example, transportation needs to harden bridges, culverts, and road designs, even though those are also utility corridors? What coordination could be done there or should be done there? Similarly with land development, location and design of structures, and how all utilities, not just electric utilities, connect to those. It's just so important, and it feels like an area that could be further elevated. TJ, I think, had pointed out that the comprehensive energy plan the department put together, that was put out the last time the cap was released as well, had a whole section on land use and energy planning that really went beyond what the climate action plan was able to address, and that we should consider as a council, and certainly as a subcommittee recommending to the council, that get elevated in the plan. I will stop there for any questions, or if there are no specific questions, public comment, of course. So I'll put myself on mute.
Any final questions on the electric sector? And yes, thanks for raising these cross-cutting issues, and I'll note land use in particular, compact settlement has been flagged as one of the key cross-cutting issues. And I know we have a couple of folks from our subcommittee sitting on that subgroup as well. Gina, please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay? Sometimes.
Yes.
Hear me? Okay. I'm finding up here in the Northeast Kingdom that just understanding the basic consumer impacts is critical for all the things we're doing, particularly during this time when cost inflation is such a big issue. It's in everybody's mind. So as we go into this with electricity or the gas tax or anything else, we need to really explain the consumer costs, particularly those have the least ability to pay, and then the direct benefits. You know, we all understand the long-term benefits, and they're huge, and you just articulated them. But we need to bring it back to the consumer and what they're going to see, as opposed to some larger, very important issue. I mean, I'm just stunned at the reaction to the res up here, and people do not understand that or feel that it's just too big a blow on consumers right now. Maybe it's been politicized, and that's not really the facts, but that's what's out there and what I'm hearing from my neighbors and others. So, you know, I'm stating the obvious, but I think we all, as we put this plan together, consumer costs, particularly those who have least ability to pay, have to be factored into our decision making.
Thanks, Gina. Right. It's a really important reminder for all of us to keep that consumer perspective at the same time that we're looking at the long-term need to reduce GHG emissions and the urgency there. And people are still very much cognizant of what they're feeling in their pocketbook. Bram, please.
Liz, on the cross-cutting topics, is workforce not as big an issue in electric as it is in thermal?
It's not that it's not a big issue. It felt like that has one that squarely has been on folks' radars and discussed, and you know, was a subject of a lot of presentation by building and thermal, and so yeah, no, there are also programs and trainings underway, so we will mention that as well. But the two that felt like we didn't really, as a either subcommittee or council, have the, I don't know, right level of heat under the fire, heat under the pot, fire under the pot, were these two. That's why they're, yeah.
Thanks.
Just as we were talking.
Okay, thanks. And Brian, we can probably take the slides down now, easier for us to all see each other. Thank you. And we are a bit behind schedule, as we tend to be. We're past our moment for public comment. Any members of the public here who would like to make any comments on the information the committee's heard so far? And we will have another opportunity for public comment in about 45 minutes. So I think we're going to forge ahead while we still have David, as well as the Climate Action Office team, to help tee up the stakeholder input sessions that we have coming up over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Melissa. Sophie, do you want to lead off here and talk about the planning that's happened and the things that are on the books? And then I'm happy to talk a little bit about agenda and things like that, how we would structure these sessions.
Sure thing. So happy to answer any questions. I'll give kind of a quick overview of where we're at, and just want to thank you all so much for being really proactive about scheduling these sessions and getting out ideas for who to invite. I've been working this week to get invitations out. I've been prioritizing the buildings and thermal input session because that's the closest one. So I've invited the majority of the people you've suggested. Climate Action Office had a couple other, based on sort of your, what you expressed as the constituents you wanted to engage. We had some other ideas to flesh that out a little further. So just wanted to let you know that those invitations are in progress. Big thanks to David's team, who's going to lend us some support with that as well. We also have, quick note on that. I asked Charlotte this morning how many people we have signed up so far. So we've got 4 people signed up so far. And just noting, I only got like the first invitations out 2 days ago. So definitely more to come. And we'll do some follow-up, you know, hey, did you see our note? Hope you can make it, emails. And there's a couple other sort of broader outreach strategies we use, such as the Climate Action Office has an e-newsletter list that goes to about 600 people. We'll include all of the input sessions there. Happy to answer any sort of clarifying questions about the overall picture of the input sessions before we dive into kind of more content specific.
Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
One question came up, first of all, just for both your information and everybody's. I'm going to make sure that the utility, group gets the invites directly. You know what I mean? So I assume there are ways for people to sign up, even if they didn't get it. Yeah. Okay, good. And then the second question arises out of that. It feels this is not the opportunity for experts at the utilities, for example, to present on particular topics. If we're going to do that, we're going to do that through cross-sector. Is that right? I guess the question is, who are we expecting to hear from? What is a stakeholder in this context?
Yeah, so let me drop the list in the chat that I have received from all of you. And there are some utilities on there, so that would be helpful for me to know. If you send any direct invites to people or entities, let me know so that I don't like duplicate that. It's not a problem if it happens. It's just helpful for me to track.
But Liz, was your question, in these sessions, are we expecting people to,
Yeah,
we want to have people present content?
They're
Yeah.
wondering whether they're there to listen and learn and be informed, or present, for lack of a better word, not formally, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, so the way they're generally conceived, these meetings, it's an opportunity for the subcommittees to lay out sort of the kinds of things you're working on, right? Not in gruesome detail, because that would be too long, but a sort of high level, and then have a set of guiding questions with whoever's there. And these are public meetings, so it's gonna, we're proactively inviting folks, but anybody can show up. But you spend most of the time having some discussion with folks about these topics. And I haven't seen a meeting yet that would warrant what you're saying, Liz, which is somebody comes prepared to give a little presentation from their perspective. It could be, Liz, because I haven't really focused on the utilities one. And it's, Sophie, I'm not sure if that may not have made it into my calendar yet, but
no, that's part of the buildings and thermal is
okay. Yeah. So definitely then, if it's part of something broader like that, there won't be time for anybody to do like another kind of presentation. However, we're very eager to get people's input. So if we know, like, we actually want to tap into utility viewpoints, then we can proactively go seek that out during the meeting.
Or
so that's very helpful.
I guess, because back in June, I think it was, this group said that we might invite subject matter experts in various areas. So it may be more appropriate and still publicly warned in a public meeting, obviously, to do it here. I don't know. But anyway, that question came up particularly because you're right, it's not an electric sector meeting, it's buildings and thermal, and they should also be, and I will be forwarding on the transportation side, because the electric utilities are doing quite a bit of work on the charging infrastructure. So anyway, might be more appropriate to have it through cross-sector.
Yeah. And just before I jump to Gina's hand, I think this is a really key point, though, which is, what is the content you really want to work on in each of these meetings? And I don't know, Sophie, I'm not sure we've shared yet. We're making a slide template to help guide the content. And I think we're happy to work with you in making sure you're getting that content on the table that you really want to have a conversation with these folks about. And so that's going to be one of the key pieces, is getting the right content on the table while not drowning people in very long presentations. And I feel like that's one of the key preparation steps, and I'm certainly happy to work with folks with filling out that template. Gina?
My question is, maybe it's been already answered in previous meetings. Is our intended audience the general public, everyone who drives and everyone who has an electric bill? Is it advocacy organizations, expert organizations, expert individuals, associations? Who do we want there?
Yeah.
Because it's so vast, and
Yeah.
you know, when I think about transportation, well, everyone who drives or everyone who goes anywhere is a stakeholder at its most basic level. Is that we want to hear from those grassroots, everyone who pays a utility bill, or do we want to hear from people who are in the field in those areas and have some expertise and they want to bat around ideas? I mean, all of this is legitimate, but it's been in the past, I've seen this sort of mix up, and I feel like we're headed in that same direction again in terms of our outreach. I could be wrong, but I just think it's something to think about. And maybe you've already worked through this and you're not looking at anybody who pays an electric bill. You're looking at organizations that have expertise and want to share ideas about what we should be doing. It's a very different meeting. Then it gets into this question of presentations, et cetera.
I have some thoughts on that, and Sophie, I bet you do too. But what I'll say for the idea of how this set of, you know, what we're calling stakeholder meetings, you don't necessarily need to use that word, but the idea around them, Gina, is that while they are open to the public, we are proactively reaching out to folks who we think would be particularly helpful folks to talk about the issues we most want to talk about with them. And so we have other pieces of the engagement and outreach puzzle that are reaching deeper down into, you know, ratepayers or people with transportation needs, particularly within an equity lens on folks who aren't typically involved in these kinds of policy processes. So there's a whole set of activity that's happening around that as well. And so these stakeholder meetings in general are being viewed as trying to reach out to key voices, representative voices, organizations, others who can speak for those different constituencies and groups. And that's sort of the general conception of these. If somebody who wants to join this call, they're just, you know, they're they use their car and they'd like to do public transportation, they want to jump on this call, great. Like, everybody's invited. Our proactive outreach are to representatives of organizations and groups and stuff like that. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, Gina, but there is a whole separate other track.
Thank you.
Right? Like
thank
Saturday,
you. You're going
we're meeting
forward.
with, we're doing like focus groups with a lot of different diverse Vermonters and we're going to be talking about stuff as well, right? So there's a whole other track beyond these meetings to get further into sort of actual users, et cetera, you know, citizens, that kind of thing.
Thank you for indulging me. That really helps me wrap my head around what you're trying to do here.
Excellent. Thanks, Gina.
Great. And if I can just add on a little bit specificity of for your two cross-sector mitigations input sessions. So I just put in the chat what I've heard and what I think generally characterizes those really direct invitations that we're making for the buildings and thermal. So we've got weatherization assistance program providers, energy efficiency and weatherization private sector contractors, energy efficiency utilities, HVAC and electrical contractors, and workforce recruitment. So there's a range in there, and a lot of the invitees fall into one of those categories. For the transportation, there's still, in terms of those like direct invitations of you kind of like represent a particular interest, there's a little more fleshing out that needs to be done for the transportation. We've got some great ideas in the public transportation realm of things, but I still need like a little bit more definition, which we might get into today. Melissa and I have emailed about it. At some point, that will be a conversation of kind of the constituent groups that are desired to be at the transportation meeting beyond public transportation interests.
Thanks, Sophie. Super helpful. Sam?
Thanks. Sorry, I was just thinking that there's been an awful lot of meetings lately, specifically on weatherization, where a lot of people have been coming together. Like I know Efficiency Vermont brought together a bunch of the community action agencies, members from the Public Service Department, a bunch of RPC folks, a bunch of other vital communities, et cetera. And we've had a series of like 3 or 4 meetings, putting a slide deck together basically on the state of it, the state of all the programs, the needs, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that a bunch of those same people just had another meeting, I think, with several people on this call. So I just want to be aware and respectful of the previous asks and making sure that how do I say this? I guarantee that those people will also still show up for this, because that's the type of folks that they are, and that's their mission, is to continue to push for these programs for their constituents, right? And I wonder if there could also be, maybe through the preparation of the slide deck or whatever it is, some nod to that. Happy to connect you with the folks that have that slide deck, or and with the list of the people who've been on that. And it's not private knowledge, that's definitely public. But I'm just thinking that, with that group, it seems like something that would be great would be to directly, maybe not go through, but to provide some version of the draft pathway strategies and actions from the thermal group. Is that what we're thinking about doing, and getting their really specific feedback directly? Like, some of these were expressly written with your constituents in mind, like what does this hit the head on the nail or not in these needs that you've already identified repeatedly? But then, I'm also really excited at the opportunity to talk with some of the, the contractors and some of the private companies, but that's a whole different, so I guess I don't know how much time I don't know how we'll know, but I'd love to sort of understand if that's the type of thing that we're talking about, and also how we can support that, if that is if that's what everyone's interested in talking about. I mean, or are we not at that point yet, and maybe that's pushing it too far? But I mean, I think that would be great. The other quick thing is just on, if we have ideas for transportation folks to be invited, is that useful or not useful? I'm just thinking of the tax.
Totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right.
Totally. And Sophie's the key contact, and or me, and particularly Sophie. Sophie, you had your hand up just now.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much airspace, but I really appreciate you mentioning that, Sam. The meeting that we held with the Climate Action Office held, it was kind of talking about the clean heat standard and the focus on weatherization. We sent out those notes. I know, thank you, Melissa, for circulating that again amongst cross-sector mitigation. I wonder, Sam, if maybe we could do a similar thing with those meetings that you referenced, and that could help to make sure that the questions we're asking kind of build upon what's already been done and are useful beyond, what's already happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And Sam, the way you described it makes a ton of sense to me. It's just, we have to be careful about how much detail is provided. So I think the key for me would be subgroup or the task group lead saying, these are the kinds of things we're working on, right? We recognize there's a lot of implementation conversations happening with, Efficiency Vermont or whatever. From a policy standpoint, we're trying to look at these things in the update, right? And don't take more than 10 minutes to talk about it, right? Because if you spend a half hour going through detailed strategies and actions, you're going to lose folks, right? But if you say, these are the things that we think from a policy standpoint and a climate action standpoint need to happen, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about it. And then we'll have this pretty diverse group in the room, right? And that is what it is, but I think it could be interesting. All right. I'm going to need to jump, but Sophie hopefully can stay. I'm looking forward to having these conversations. I do say that I will make myself available on helping task leads put the slides together. Sophie will circulate those in a bit. And so lean on me or Sophie's office, or Sophie and others in the Climate Action Office for help in getting that together. We'll share around an agenda so you can see sort of how we're going to be handling stuff.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David. Thanks for being here today. And it sounds like the meeting is 2 weeks from today, just as a reminder for everybody. So probably circling back with a subgroup next week to really get ourselves organized and get that content organized, and even potentially share the content in advance with people who are registered, I think could be helpful. So let's, again, thanks for being here today, and we'll be in touch soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And sorry to drop.
No worries. Scott, please go ahead.
Thanks. Just something to consider. I'm looking at the list of stakeholders, you want to call them that you're planning to talk to. One of the things we've been talking about extensively in the subcommittee, Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, is the role of affordable housing or housing, given that the state of Vermont has, like most of the country, a housing crisis. And I wonder if it would be useful to include, for lack of a better term, an innovative building contractor or developer in your list, because a lot of what you're doing in this list is talking about, from my point of view, weatherization, electrification of existing homes, as opposed to new developments. And I think it'd be useful to talk to somebody who has been involved in developments that have electrification. For example, the O'Brien brothers in South Burlington. And South Burlington and Burlington now have ordinances that require electrification as opposed to fossil fuel heating supplies for new developments. So it might be useful to include a couple of developers in at those meetings.
Thanks, Scott. That's a great suggestion and a good flag. The overlap between energy and housing, right, is really critical. And so adding some developers, Sophie, to the list, and we can follow up with details. Also, the affordable housing community in general, VHFA and other partners would probably be good additions to the list. Again, most of our work is around retrofitting existing buildings, but we shouldn't lose sight of new building stock coming online. So, well, we have Sophie and Liz here. Essentially, what I'm hearing is, as next steps that we all, as cross-sector, need to develop is some content, which I think for this initial meeting, Buildings and Thermal has done a lot of work to get their recommendations into shareable format that may just need to be pared down. Again, we saw the electric sector's slides today, so I'm imagining some sort of combination of those in a much more shortened and digestible format. Sounds like we need to be coming up with some discussion questions. What are we asking of these folks? And again, I'd probably recommend getting those questions to attendees in advance so that they can come with some thoughts prepared. I think that might foster more robust discussion. And I'm hearing that there's a slide template coming from the Climate Action Office. So what am I missing?
Yeah, you got it, exactly. And I actually got the slide template now. If you want to take a quick peek at it, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but let me know if that would be of interest. Alternately,
Sure, let's take a quick peek and then, yeah.
Okay, great, here we go. So we can, if there's any major feedback you have, let me know. We want to keep this sort of a reasonable length. So it's about 8 slides. And as David mentioned, an agenda that provides details about who says what when is forthcoming. But we've got the intro slide, a little bit of background of how we got to where we are, Global Warming Solutions Act, original climate action plan, and then what's going on, what's the sort of focal areas of the update. Then a kind of placing us in this year, what's happened so far, where are we going? This slide needs a little bit more editing and refining, so I won't spend too much time on it, but basically what happened in the summer and September, October, where are we now, and then what happens next. Then it comes down to the level of your subcommittee. What does your subcommittee do? Who are your task groups and what have their focal areas been? And then today, which focal area are we talking about? And then again, this is going to be at the strategy level. In order to acknowledge we're going to have a lot of voices in the room. We're not going to be able to get down to the very micro level of detail. I think that will probably be helpful for getting the content up there. So what are the major strategy items you're working about and the direction that they're headed in? And then your questions. Which I fully support. If you can get them together and be able to send those out in advance, that would be really supportive of a robust discussion. And then after the discussion, there's a follow-up slide of how to stay in the loop.
Super,
Yeah,
thank
Christine.
you. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, those slides are great. I'm sure the thermal sector task group will be able to work with those. I just want to point out, we're starting at the pathways level and then going to strategy. So I recognize that we can't get into the details of what we in the CAP nomenclature would call actions, but I do want to bring attention to the concept of pathways, because I do think those broad pathways help those from the outside looking into our work understand why we've selected the specific strategies that we have.
That makes sense. So maybe a slide right before the strategies one. So you do pathway level, strategy level.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments about the input sessions we are planning? I will follow up with our subcommittee after this meeting. And like I said, probably try and get some time, Sophie and Liz, with you and David next week for a more in-depth planning session, relying heavily on the folks from Buildings and Thermal and the Electricity Task Group as well. And please, folks, start thinking about the kind of questions we want to be asking of our stakeholders, right? Beyond just directionally, are these hitting the mark, and can we get into some more meaningful level of detail? And again, around questions, potentially some of those items that we were discussing earlier around where do you want these costs to show up on your electric bill or somewhere else? Those are some of the key issues that I'd really love to hear from outsiders on. So did some flopping on our agenda. I admit I've lost track a little bit of whether we're on time or not on time, but we are going to pivot now to hearing from our Just Transitions liaisons on a new product that subcommittee has developed to help guide our work in integrating equity and just transitions considerations throughout the development of our strategies, pathways, and actions that we'll be potentially recommending. And this was shared in advance. I don't know if would it be helpful, Kelly and Sam, to bring up the graphic? And Brian, do you have that at the ready, or should I try to share? It was embedded in the agenda, I believe.
Yeah, but if you have it open, that would be more expedient.
Oh goodness. Open among.
I just put it in the chat if that's helpful for you to just click on it from there.
Perfect. And let's try that. Everyone seeing that screen? No?
Oh, now it looks like it's showing.
Are you all seeing that? I can never tell what you see when I'm working with two screens. Looks like the graphic is up and I see you all.
Looks good.
Great. Should we just dive in?
Sure.
Awesome. So basically this is supposed to be a handy help, I guess, an idea, a list of suggestions, literally a checklist of a few key things that the Just Transitions Committee is trying to ask the subcommittees to do, or suggested things to ask the subcommittees to do as they're working on the draft actions and then also on the chapter updates. And so, basically really simply, at the very top, you'll see incorporating guiding principles for just transition. There's a link there to the original guiding principles for just transition that was developed in the last plan. And, I'll mark the asks as we go and then again at the end. But, one of the first asks would be that everyone individually take, maybe 20 minutes at least at some point in their time to go through. There's a really great framework. It splits into 4 different sort of aspects of equity. It gives quite a lot of context and additional resources, and then also has an extended sort of rubric that could be used for sort of policy development. Actually, I think it was the T-bill, the Climate Caucus and Legislature used the rubric a few years ago on the T-bill, and it resulted in a lot of really interesting conversations. And also that rubric can be modified to be used to pass written chapters or written plans through as well. And so just wanted to point to that extended document, and the sort of first ask from the Just Transitions Committee would be, if folks could please take time to review that. Now, understanding that everybody has a lot of asks already on them, and that everything is time sensitive and capacity is low, this document was created to just basically try to highlight a few key ways that aspects of this guiding principles and extended rubric could be used. So the circles are actions for the subcommittee to take, basically literally a checkbox to track progress. And then the rectangles have questions that have been selected from that extended rubric and guidance document that the subcommittees could use in a variety of ways. And this is all sort of more or less linear. There's some overlapping in the process, but starting with step 1 in early September, step 2 and 3 is kind of where we are now, and really moving into step 4, which you'll see on the next page. But sort of the suggestion would be, and again, understanding that we've already done some of this, and so some of a lot of this is not new, but as the working groups are going through and developing pathways, strategies, and actions, there are several questions that we can remind ourselves to ask while we're having those conversations. I think, I'll give some examples, and I think that we've kind of more or less been doing this, perhaps not consistently, but definitely, but actually, it really has come up quite a few times. And so again, this isn't new, but it's meant as a guide to ensure that continues to happen, especially as we feel that time pressure and the lack of capacity as we get closer and closer to the deadline. So, for example, I think, pulling on some examples from the buildings group, when we were looking at strategy, or sorry, I'll say pathway 1, reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with buildings and facilities, focusing on weatherization, as well as codes, the strategies that were focused on weatherization. We did, ask ourselves did come up about how do different communities experience inequity around this issue. So that's, as you see, the first question in the blue box under step 2, right in the middle of the screen there, under the 2 long ovals, who benefits? So who's been able to take advantage of weatherization projects, and maybe who hasn't? And who, and exactly sort of that issue of like, who's bearing the burden and how can we address them, right? So these aren't new. That led to us adding actions that focus specifically on prioritizing low and moderate income households. It also led to a future strategy action, don't want to mess those up. Another action explicitly calling out the boundary of sort of the prerequisites for weatherization, so including home health and safety repairs that needed to be done, so vermiculite removal, knob and tube mitigation, et cetera, that prevent people from accessing the existing programs. And so I really say this to demonstrate that this isn't anything particularly new for this group, which is great, but just making hopefully we can use this tool to make sure that we continue to do it in our conversations as we move forward, and also hopefully checking some of these off and sort of looking at this can affirm and give us some language to also make sure that we highlight the work that's been done in this realm by the different working groups when we do talk to other stakeholders and community members. Hopefully as we move forward, and I don't know if you could move down a little bit, but as we move forward with stakeholder events, and this is key to what Sophie was just talking about with input sessions, but also the asks from the community engagement folks about making sure that we have questions and then also reviewing feedback and holding ourselves accountable to incorporating it where we can throughout the sort of prioritization and drafting process. So there's more to happen here, and I think I would hope that we could, even for the buildings group, we could revisit the draft that we have and make sure that we've asked ourselves some of these questions for every single one. So, for example, we have a sub in the same group as the other one, a sub of action that's ensure all state funded weatherization rules and guidelines are written to maximize greenhouse gas reductions in alignment with the requirements of GWSA. we could maybe asking ourselves some of these questions might encourage us to include and does so in a just way, or does so without leaving people behind, or maybe we think that that's covered in the other actions. But I think there's still room that where this could be useful. I don't really want to belabor this point. I would love, I think Callie and I really talked about it, and also with Sophie, that in a future meeting, it would be great to revisit some of the resources that are embedded in this. There is a checklist that is definitely incomplete that's embedded here that talks about different sort of demographics and different identities that can be simply as proximity to something or away from something. It also has to do with various personal identities, etc. Going through that and just kind of considering how groups have or haven't been considered, and if there are gaps that we note moving forward. And also, it might also inspire us for folks that we might want to talk to or we don't know the answer moving forward. And so I think we would really strongly ask that maybe that could be on a future agenda for this whole group. And yeah, I don't know if I've left anything out, but I'm going to pass it off to you, Callie, to round it up.
Anything to add there? Thanks, Sam. Callie?
Yeah, sorry, I was first typing something in the chat and then realized I was muted. So I was trying to do 3 things at once. Yeah, and I think just to provide also just some higher level context too, I think, as you're probably all aware, the other Just Transitions liaisons of the other subcommittees are also sharing this with their, with their subcommittees that they're the liaison for. So, and yeah, the idea is, Sam went through it perfectly, so I don't think I need to really build upon it. But, if continuing to revisit this resource, I think, and not just using it as a one-time, like, yep, we did that, we did that, we did that. But, referring back to it regularly, and each of the task groups as they're working on and refining their recommendations, continuing to refer to this as a resource.
Yeah, are you just reading in the chat there?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. It's
Great.
very obvious.
Andrea. Yeah. So can Just Transitions help the task groups in the subcommittee kind of work through applying this in action to the potential recommendations?
Sure. If you want to actually go to the last page of this little handout, it's a great question. Good thing we didn't skip to it, but you're inevitably going to run into questions. So there's several different ways. So Callie and I are the liaisons here, but also, I think we will be holding space in the Just Transitions committee meetings moving forward. If there'd like to be a more extended conversation with the rest of the group, we have a lot of different perspectives and experience and knowledge and expertise on that Just Transitions subcommittee that can't really be, it's definitely not embodied in just Callie and I. So, that's also an opportunity as well. So, and there's another option, obviously, via email or something else like that, if the meeting, an additional meeting is not attractive. But I think, we also want to emphasize that there's a lot of, this is not the only way that we hope and want equity considerations to come into the process of the plan. This is just one tool specifically for the sort of the subcommittees and the working groups. And I think that there's a lot of other members at the last meeting, which I watched, I wasn't able to be at, but who brought a lot of heart sort of and
yeah, I think Sophie actually has, so our, one of our co-chairs of the Just Transition Subcommittee did a write-up that she shared with the Ag and Eco Committee. And I think Sophie has some more information on that maybe she wanted to speak to.
Yeah. There was a great discussion at the Just Transition Subcommittee last week around how heady this all can get and kind of the the steps and the checklist and even like the rubric and the guiding principles can start to get very intellectual, and especially when questions come up and it's hard to kind of figure out when there's like competing kind of priorities that come in. That's kind of my elaboration on it, but basically that like a lot of this work gets at our lived experience and whether or not we can like access that feeling of why we're here in the first place, which I think we're all like, all of you are putting in so much. And I think you're you're all here for a reason that like gets at your heart and like why you choose to put hours and hours into this work, and acknowledging that equity takes more time and you have very busy schedules and already are putting so much in. But I'd like to, after that discussion, which I thought was really helpful for me in like sort of bringing me back to the like, why am I here? Why am I putting so much into this? And why is this extra sort of layer and this integral foundational question of equity so important? Abby Willard, a co-chair of Just Transitions, kind of wrote up a couple of bullets that were like her takeaways from that conversation. And so I'd like to read them all to you and invite you to just take a minute. You can close your eyes if that's helpful for you, to like call in some of those original reasons why you came to this work, why you decided to sign up for this subcommittee and spend this extra time. Is it a grandkid or a child whose future that you care about? Is it a place that you love? Is it something else entirely? Like, what pulled you into this? So I'm going to read Abby's summary and just invite you to like hold that piece with you as I'm reading. So we are each here to contribute towards ensuring we have a livable planet for the next generations. We will make decisions to support the land we live on, the air we breathe, the stewardship of natural resources. We bring an inclusive community mindset to the process of developing recommendations. We desire a community that helps one another, cares for each other, reaches out and engages others. We recognize that we can't afford to leave anyone behind, that everyone's impact in this evolving climate matters. If one of us is suffering, all of us are feeling that same suffering. We can bring our full heart to this work and think about those that this work supports and may burden with the goal to be collective rising for all. So I just want to thank you all for the reasons that you're here and the hard work that you're bringing to it, and frame this up. You know, it requires a lot of thought, and it's also a practice of the heart and the soul, and really appreciate the Just Transition Subcommittee for bringing that forward in our discussion last week, and thank you for the space to bring it all to you.
Yeah, any questions or comments from the group? Thank you to the Just Transitions liaisons and Sophie as well. You know, in my mind, this is where the rubber meets the road with equity, right? And, you know, we talk a lot in this subcommittee about the status quo has inequities embedded in it, and how can we frame solutions that will help resolve those inequities. And you know, I think it's incumbent on us as a subcommittee, if we're proposing solutions and they carry costs or a price tag, really making sure that those don't exacerbate the inequities that are already existing, right? There's inequities now. Make sure our solutions and our recommendations are moving the needle in the right direction on equity. And then I think the second piece that really comes out in the graphic here is, as we develop our recommendations, how are we really ensuring that they are reflective of the input that we have heard from stakeholders across the spectrum? So I think that's a tall charge for the subcommittee, and it's going to require us to grapple with some difficult policy choices, difficult tensions. You know, some of that came out earlier. We want electricity to be affordable. We want people to choose electrification, and supporting low-income households in electrifying is going to cost money. And how do we tease that out? So I think that's really the task before us in the next couple of months, as we sift through all of the great recommendations that we have and look towards prioritizing, you know, what this subcommittee is going to lift up to the council as a whole for consideration. Anything else? And sorry, I'm facilitating solo here and I'm a mess, but I can't remember if we have had our second opportunity for public comment or not, but I will pause here. Any other, yeah, Andrea shaking your head. Any other comments from members of the public? or subcommittee members on this just transitions piece. Okay, great. Well, I think I stopped sharing my screen. You're probably not seeing that anymore. Last few meetings, we've run through our agenda and been over time. So I want to make sure we had some time as a subcommittee, kind of talk about the work we have coming up in the next, I think it's really 2 to 3 months. The bulk of our work will be happening, and talking about both kind of what that work looks like and what our ability is to meet and kind of get through the tasks that have been assigned to us. So just as a reminder, folks, we have 2 input sessions coming up, and I have the dates here. So again, the first one on transportation with, again, electricity as a supporting policy will be in 2 weeks from today on October 24th. Those are 12:30 to 2. So just a little bit shorter than our typical meeting time. As I mentioned, I'd love to have at least a subset of this group get together next week to kind of refine that first input session. The transportation stakeholder input session will be on November 7th, again, during that 12:30 to 2 timeframe. I would really recommend that we start meeting more frequently. I'm just going to flag that. Bi-weekly would be my recommendation, and that would give us 1 more meeting as a subcommittee before that transportation input session takes place on November 7th. And then, of course, our monthly recurring meeting for November would be a week later on November 14th. So comments, thoughts, feedback from the group. Yeah, Liz, please go ahead.
Get out there on it. So putting aside for a second frequency, because I hear what you're saying and I agree with you that more frequent feels necessary. I'd start from like, what do we need? And it feels like the thing we haven't been able to do. We touched on a little bit today that was super helpful for Christine, sort of standing up and saying, I'm just going to say it, right? So I appreciate that. We haven't had a lot of opportunity to talk to each other rather than be presented to, right? And that happened in my presentation today again. And it feels like I've heard and I've seen, for example, things in the other task groups that I know, folks that, are, in the representation group I'm here for would want to have input in, right? But we haven't really had that time. So I'd almost suggest that we build like what it is we want to do. And that may not even be bi-weekly. It might be, more meetings in a certain 2-week period than another just because of schedules or something. But that's what I think needs to happen. Like, I'm just going to put it out there, like focus time to really probe and react to what we hear in the upcoming meetings and what we all know from the expertise we bring to the table, even if we're not on each other's task groups. The second thing I want to put on the table is, I don't know how to do it, and I am a part of the steering committee, but the steering committee is, of course, just kind of procedural. We need to grapple with what recommendations our subcommittee has on the cross-cutting issues, and not just what they should be, but how they should be, and like the level and ranking of importance and treatment in the CAP, given what Vermont is facing. I'll stop.
Thanks, Liz. That's really helpful. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with essentially what are we trying to do in each meeting. And I will admit I have struggled with, we're trying to get updates and then we're trying to have discussion, and now we're trying to plan for public input. And we can't react to the public input until we've had it. But so great suggestions. And the way I see it, essentially we're in the engagement phase right now, and it seems like it's a pretty compressed and shortened phase, and we're going to scramble a little bit, and we're going to try and pull off these events and get some really good learnings and some good input. And then we're essentially immediately moving into prioritization. And so I think that is where some of this really in-depth conversation at the subcommittee level needs to happen. And I can envision having a separate session, a separate cross-sector meeting on each of our subject areas, and really just diving deeper on the recommendations that, as you accurately conveyed, have really been just presented to the group, and we haven't really digested or reacted to or offered tweaks to. So I'm going to table cross-cutting for a minute because I think maybe Sophie and Liz can give us an update there on the path forward. But I see, again, engagement as the next step and prioritization as the step after that. And I do think we're still going to be needing some additional guidance from the steering committee and or the Climate Action Office on prioritization framework. Christine, please.
This is very mechanical and operational, and it's not new or innovative, but one technique one might consider moving forward is identifying and naming and putting on the agenda, say, 3 top goals for this meeting directed at the subcommittee members, so that we know right ahead what the co-chairs and steering committee and whoever else is really hoping to get from us at that meeting, which might help channel our as subcommittee members' thoughts and interactions, a little bit less popcorn, which I have greatly contributed to, unfortunately, this meeting. But that's just one suggestion I've found helpful in other settings.
Great. I like that. I appreciate that, Christine. Really helpful, and we can work that in and communicate that more clearly as well. Other thoughts on either frequency of meetings and or structure of meetings to help us tackle? Again, as I'm understanding the timeline, I keep saying 2 to 3 months. I think the initial timeline that we had presented in the guidance from the steering committee to the subcommittees was that we would have to have our recommendations essentially baked and lifted up to the Climate Council by December. Liz or someone in the Climate Action Office, I'm thinking that timeline is slipping a bit. I don't know the schedule for Climate Council meetings, but I'm thinking by January, we really need to have our recommendations more formalized for consideration of the council. So again, we're talking about really November and December as the time we can do that work.
Are we yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's right. And there's gonna be more information forthcoming with like a more detailed timeline. But that is right, that like initially aiming December to have like everything in those like template formats at least getting carried over to the council. But yeah, that we're trying to also navigate where some committees are at this point as well. So more information forthcoming, but that is the hope is that December these things can move along to the council.
Sorry, the December meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. And the templates are templates for our strategies, pathways, and actions.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So those yeah, where you're plugging in whether you're removing, keeping, revising, and then making those revisions in those templates. And then that's what's going to eventually get carried over. But I'll also, I know it's probably going to do all into that, like kind of like proposed timeline. So I'll send that as well in the chat.
That'd be helpful. And then, I mean, I think the question I have, and some of you all were around for the last CAP, I was not, at least not in this role. I mean, the prioritization, we have laid out the 5 criteria by which we are prioritizing our recommendations, right? We remember those are impact, cost effectiveness, co-benefits, equity, and technical feasibility. To my knowledge, the task groups have not dug into this and we haven't asked them to, and cross-sector really does need to dive into that. And I think that's where we might be looking for a little bit more support. Are those really, I would hope those can be evaluation criteria that are more than just qualitative. And that's where I see we'll have, I don't have a count on how many strategies, pathways, and actions we currently have under consideration, but I know it's a big number. And just as a reminder to folks, we're being asked to come up with maybe a list of 2 to 3 for high priority consideration by the council. So that prioritization piece I see is really key. And I think we may need some more tools and support there. Welcome any thoughts people have on that process.
I'll just say there's more forthcoming too on the prioritization framework to support you all in the work.
Okay, yeah, Gina, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Prioritization is just around strategies, right? And if we don't have, if we have the data now, we're not going to have it in 2 months. to start to really put meat to those. I mean, we're in the middle of a study right now for transportation cap and invest, and we're going to have some really good information, but that's the result of a very intensive deep dive into this. But I don't know if others are going to have the benefit of that. So yeah, I agree. It would be nice, but to what extent we're going to actually put numbers on those strategies is going to be hard to invent starting right now. You know, I only know this from transportation, so maybe the other areas can whip off some justifications or prioritization, data metrics, whatever. But I think a lot of it's going to be qualitative, unless I'm missing something. And that's just around strategies. I don't see why we need to do pathways. I mean, that's so obvious. It seems like a waste of time. You know, as far as the scheduling goes, I got my time right now. I would reserve the days in our calendars because we're all busy. But then you need to do some deep thinking around what Liz suggested, and that is, here's what we need to achieve, and we need to hear from this expert, or there's a transportation issue that we all need to learn more about, for instance, and we need to set an hour for our group to learn about that particular issue so that we can better evaluate it and then pass it on to the full council as an example of the type of more intensive discussion we have to have. But we're not going to know it for the next couple of weeks or months. So setting the meetings aside, but then really planning them in terms of the goals, the achievements we want out of those meetings. So we may find we need more time because there's X number of experts we need to hear from, and we'll take an hour on each one that everybody needs to hear from the various sectors.
Yep. Thanks, Gina. Yes, so I will confirm. So my inclination would be to move to bi-weekly and keep the time session that we have hopefully reserved Thursdays 12 to 2. And I'm hearing loud and clear that we need a clear articulation of what is the goal of each meeting, that co-chairs need to do better on. So getting that, and I will communicate that more clearly. And then I'm just going to ask from the subcommittee, really let me know if there are presentations that we need or people that we need to invite. I'm feeling very time constrained, and I also want to make sure that we have time to hear from the folks that we need to hear from. Again, I think the next meeting is going to be focused on planning public engagement session for transportation. So I think that will be our next cross-sector meeting. And then after that, we're going to move into the prioritization framework. But if we do need to hear from, say, the distribution utilities or other entities that haven't been part of the conversation yet, I think we can make time on the agenda. I don't know, Sam or Christine. Sam, go ahead, please.
Hopefully it's quick. I just want to point out the Liz did share and Sophie the guidance, and it does say prioritize our actions. So I think that's going to be tougher than we think. And I just wanted to highlight, if I may be so bold, to Sophie and Liz, that this is a great time when we're still clarifying how we're doing that and how many we each get, et cetera, to maybe maybe there can be some space reserved for maybe the Just Transitions Committee can highlight some actions that could be prioritized in terms of equity, and that way we don't maybe have as much conflict, or maybe we don't have those. Sometimes they tend to fall out of the prioritization process, I'll just say it. And so I'd love to see there be some room for that, either that the subcommittees themselves get to pick an extra one or two in that regard that might have fallen off the table, or that they could work with the Just Transitions to pick some, and those recommendations could come directly from the Just Transitions Committee. But subcommittee, I just wanted to suggest that. I guess it can't hurt.
Really quickly before I go to Christine, so when is the council meeting next, and is that the December meeting? No.
I believe it's Monday, December 9th from 11 to 2 is the next week.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so that's right.
And the steering committee will meet before that. I mean, in terms of getting additional input or guidance from the steering committee before, if we really are supposed to have a package of recommendations that we're bringing on December 9th.
Yeah, we're meeting, the steering committee is meeting not next month, 2 Mondays from now. So, yeah.
Yeah, October 21st.
Okay, so do we need to articulate this ask kind of one around more refinement around what is the ask of our subcommittee? How many recommendations, I use recommendations as encompassing pathways, strategies, and actions. But just kind of what parameters are we working in? And again, to Sam's point, you know, how many do we really get to say our priorities? Is there flexibility there? That'd be helpful for this group as we look at doing the prioritization. Christine.
Yeah, I can appreciate the movement towards a couple of leading recommendations, whether they're at the pathway, strategies, or actions level. And I would encourage us to be careful about the messaging about that, because by definition, if we're trying to move the entire economy off fossil fuels, there are many, many, many different things that need to change. And if we are trying to come down to just 2 or 3, those are going to be really major market changing, market moving recommendations by definition, right? And based on reality, we know that any major market moving recommendation is going to have winners and losers and be very disruptive, because we're trying to change business as usual, which means that it'll take a long time and a lot of movement among many different stakeholders and interested parties to actually agree on what those top 2 to 3 recommendations should be. And we know the choices are things like cap and invest, carbon tax, clean heat standard, and a handful of others. And we've known that for a while. So I would encourage us to strive for really clear top 2 or 3 market moving recommendations and be prepared to stand behind them and defend them and explain them. And to also recognize there are another batch of equally important market supporting and implementation supporting activities that will also need to happen, and not project that the answer is as simple as 2 to 3 things, because it's far more complicated than that. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Go ahead, Gina.
Thanks for what you just said, Christine. With that in mind, Andrea put into the chat that our group, the consultants looking at the Cap and Invest program, are going to be inviting this group to a stakeholder meeting. And I think that needs to count as one of our meetings, because this group really needs to get up to speed on what that's all about. And we don't need to have them come. We should be all encouraged to go to that. Now, maybe that means the meeting would be warned anyway. So
yeah, and I'll just say, like, when we're talking, sorry, Gina, but when we're talking about this as a team, you know, trying to come into one of these meetings and understanding the capacity and the work at hand, is there really enough room to talk about that? And so that's why our latest conversations were to invite you to one of the stakeholder meetings. There'll be other people in that stakeholder meeting too. It won't be just cross-sector, but yeah.
Well, I'll leave it to you guys to figure out how you know, in terms of public meeting, how that's going to work. Maybe it is, they're already public meetings. So, but anyway, I would strongly encourage the cross-sector mitigation team to be at that meeting. And if we have a limited amount of time each week, that's got to be a priority from my biased transportation perspective. But I hope we can work that out. And Andrea, you work with Melissa on timing.
Yeah, do we have dates yet for that, Andrea?
No, we have not sent out invitations yet. We've got 4 different groups that we're meeting with, and we'd like to provide some level of, you know, options for holding those. But clearly there is a lot of meetings going on at the end of October and early November around climate. So we're trying to figure out when those will be, but somewhere in the first, I think it's 2 weeks, Brian, is it first 2 weeks of November that we're aiming for?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I guess where I was going with that was, where does it fit with our cross sectors transportation input session, which I guess is scheduled for the 7th. And so will we have had the benefit of participating in this meeting on the Cap and Invest prior or not? Cap and Invest is obviously something we'll need to cover at our input session, given that that's a potential recommendation.
Right.
It doesn't sound like we're gonna be ready by then, but I haven't been directly involved in the study.
Ready, I mean, we're not gonna have a draft.
Ready
from-
for
No, it's not gonna be done till the end
Yeah.
of the year, but
Right.
the analysis.
We could
won't-
update,
but-
we could
Yeah.
share with the interested stakeholders where we are right now.
I mean, we're required to file a status update by November 15th with the legislature, so that will be certainly public as well, and
Well, we're running out of time. I'm certainly feeling some calendar anxiety. I imagine other folks are as well. We will keep in touch about planning for upcoming meetings. Again, tentatively, in my mind, again, we'll have at least a subgroup of this subcommittee do some more work on the buildings and thermal session. I'm recommending that we meet again on October 24th will be that session. And then October 31st, I would recommend we meet to plan the transportation session, which will be held on 11/7. Yeah, I'm hearing, I'm going to use our existing time slot as a starting point. I think that otherwise trying to wrangle calendars is going to be a disaster. So that puts us on almost weekly meetings up until Thanksgiving. That would have us starting our prioritization on, I think, 11/21. Then we have Thanksgiving, and then I haven't had a chance to look at how that fits with the 12/9 council meeting. I think we'd squeeze in one more cross-sector meeting before the climate council. So really only 2 meetings again to kind of digest the input that we've taken from the public input sessions and do some prioritization. And potentially hear from any entities that we haven't yet heard from, which is, that's going to be some aggressive scheduling. Yeah. All right. Sam, and do you want to verbalize your question in the chat?
This would be super unpopular, but I'm one of those people that sometimes I just need to like block off a chunk of time and get it all done. And that sometimes the space in between the meetings just means that half of it I'm just getting back into what I'm doing. And I understand that not everyone's like that, but is there any thought of just having like a summit day or some sort of thing where like all of the subcommittees are in the same place? We can do our round robin meetings in the morning, and then we can break off into our working groups in the afternoon and actually really have a few hours to just sit down and have those conversations together that Liz was talking about. I mean, obviously I know maybe the morning meetings are public and maybe the afternoon is working groups, and we figure out how to make sure that that's all, within public meeting law, but I don't know. And obviously this might, again, be atrocious to try to schedule blocking off more time for everybody on the same time. But I just thought I would suggest it because sometimes it's just really, with all the numbers of meetings, I almost feel like sometimes we're getting less time.
yeah, Sam, I support that. And that's what I put in the chat for our rural resilience meeting. We're going to aim for a 3-hour, hopefully people will come. Everybody involved in this is so busy, and not everybody's engaged when we're online the whole time. It's a lot easier to be engaged when you're in person. And I agree, there needs to be that super focused conversational discussion, not just like an update where you think maybe I'm going to provide input on this later, or, so I agree. The working, an in-person working session is very valuable, but I don't know. I think within a subcommittee, not necessarily amongst subcommittees, but because there's already those cross-cutting meetings going on. I mean, I think if you looked at climate council meetings in the next 6 weeks, there's probably going to be 40 meetings, I'm not kidding. It's really a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm not, from the Climate Action Office, I'm going to speak for you all. I think it's probably too late to bring together the various disparate input sessions that we're planning. I'm certainly open to doing an in-person session for our subcommittee in general as we grapple with kind of the more meaty topics that we need to work on, specifically prioritization. Just kind of thumbs up, thumbs down for in-person meetings. We have a 2-hour time slot blocked. I think we could go as many as 3 hours, have an afternoon session. Seeing a couple of thumbs up. I'm not actually seeing any thumbs down, so I might proceed with that plan. We're getting close to time. I'm gonna plop into the chat what I think is our, as long as not in person on October 31st, says Jared. All right, that we can work around that. October 31st is my birthday, so I'm fine not spending 3 hours on this stuff. Okay, I'm gonna follow up with you all with a follow-up email, again, laying out the schedule and Halloween, of course. And again, resending some of the resources that we have from the steering committee, from the Climate Action Office around prioritization, around the tasks assigned to cross-sector. Again, to kind of bring us all back to what are the tasks at hand. And I'll loop Rich in, of course, and your co-chairs will work really diligently to get agendas that are really clear. And again, highlight the goals that we are trying to achieve in the short time that we have together. And it looks like December 5th would be a potential meeting. Okay. So any last minute comments, concerns, complaints from the group?
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you all for hanging in there. Just putting this, but I'll follow up with an email. Have a good afternoon, all.